They called me a gold digger at my own engagement party. The groom's family whispered behind my back, thinking I wasn't good enough for their precious son. But when my brother walked through those doors, their laughter died instantly. What happened next changed everything forever. Hi, I'm Jasmine, and today I'm sharing the most shocking night of my life. If you've ever been underestimated or judged unfairly, this story will hit close to home. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss what happens next. Let me take you back to 6 months ago when I first met Luca. I was grading papers at my favorite coffee shop downtown, completely absorbed in my work as a third-grade teacher. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows, casting warm light across my stack of spelling tests and reading assignments. That's when this man accidentally bumped into my table, spilling coffee all over my carefully organized lesson plans. The dark liquid spread across the papers like ink, ruining hours of preparation. Instead of offering a quick apology and walking away like most people would, he stood there for a moment looking at the damage with genuine concern. Then he sat down across from me without asking, pulled napkins from the dispenser, and began helping me salvage what we could. His movements were deliberate and calm, as if he had all the time in the world. There was something about the way he carried himself that made people naturally step aside. Even in that crowded coffee shop, he seemed to occupy his own space, separate from everyone else. "I'll buy you another coffee," he said. His voice was low and measured, the kind of voice that didn't need to be raised to be heard. "And whatever else you need to fix this mess I made." I looked up at him then, really looked at him. He was older than me, maybe mid to late 30s, with dark hair and darker eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and there was a weight to his presence that I couldn't quite name. Most men his age in expensive suits would have been checking their phones, anxious to move on with their day. But he sat there, patient and focused entirely on me. "It's okay," I said, though my carefully planned week of lessons was now a soggy mess. "Accidents happen." "They do," he agreed, "but that doesn't mean we ignore the consequences." Something about the way he said it made me think he wasn't just talking about spilled coffee. We talked for hours after that, though calling it talking doesn't quite capture what happened. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. When I told him about my students, about the little boy who'd finally learned to read after months of struggle, or the girl who wrote the most beautiful stories but refused to share them with anyone, he listened with an intensity that made me feel like my words mattered. "You care about them," he observed. It wasn't a question. "Of course I do. They're children. They deserve someone who cares." "Not everyone thinks that way," he said, and there was something in his tone that suggested he'd seen too much of the world's indifference. "Most people only care about what benefits them directly." He told me his name was Luca Moretti and that he handled family business. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. There was a privacy about him, invisible walls he'd built that I sensed shouldn't be climbed without invitation. When he asked for my number, he didn't pull out his phone and hand it to me like most guys did. Instead, he took out a small leather notebook and a pen, wrote down my number in careful script, then tore out a page and wrote his own. "If you need anything," he said, handing me the paper, "call me anytime." Our relationship grew in the weeks that followed, though it grew differently than any relationship I'd experienced before. Luca didn't text constantly or flood me with messages. When he said he'd call, he called. When he said he'd be somewhere, he was there exactly on time. There was a reliability to him that felt almost old-fashioned, as if he operated by rules most people had forgotten. He would appear at my apartment after long days, carrying bags of food from restaurants I'd never heard of. Not the trendy places that advertise on social media, but quiet establishments where the owners knew him by name and seemed almost grateful for his business. He never talked about his work in detail. When I asked about his day, he'd give vague answers about meetings and family obligations, then turn the conversation back to me. "Tell me about the kids," he'd say, settling onto my worn couch as if it were the most comfortable place in the world. "What happened today?" And I would tell him, watching as his serious expression softened slightly when I described the funny things 8-year-olds say or the small victories that made my job worthwhile. He never looked at his phone during these conversations, never seemed distracted or impatient. It was as if, for those hours in my small apartment, nothing else existed. I knew Luca had money. His clothes were expensive. His car was a sleek black Maserati that looked like it belonged in a movie, and he lived in what he called a family home on the edge of the city. But he never flaunted any of it. When I cooked simple pasta in my tiny kitchen, he ate it like I'd prepared something extraordinary. When we watched movies on my secondhand couch, he'd pull me close and say softly, "This is good. This is real." There were moments when I caught glimpses of another side of him. Once, a man approached us on the street, drunk and aggressive, demanding money. I'd started to reach for my purse, but Luca had simply looked at the man. He didn't say a word, didn't make a threatening gesture, but something in his eyes made the drunk stumble backward and hurry away. When I asked about it later, Luca just said, "Some people understand certain languages better than others." Another time, we were at a restaurant when another diner became loud and abusive toward the waitstaff. The manager seemed afraid to intervene, and the other customers were pretending not to notice. Luca had excused himself from our table, walked over to the man, and leaned down to speak quietly in his ear. Whatever he said made the color drain from the man's face. Within seconds, the troublemaker was gone, leaving cash on the table and practically running for the door. "What did you say to him?" I asked when Luca returned. "I reminded him that actions have consequences," Luca replied calmly, cutting his steak with precise movements. "Some people forget that." I should have asked more questions. I should have pressed harder about his family's business, about the way people seemed to recognize him in certain parts of the city, about the phone calls he'd take in another room, speaking in low Italian that I couldn't understand. But I was falling in love with the man who made me feel safe and valued, who treated me like I was precious even when I was wearing sweatpants and grading papers at midnight. 6 months after we met, Luca proposed. He took me back to that same coffee shop where we'd first spoken, and at the table where he'd spilled coffee on my lesson plans, he got down on one knee. The ring he offered was beautiful but not ostentatious, a single diamond set in what looked like an antique band. "Jasmine," he said, and the way he spoke my name made my heart skip. "You make me believe there's still anything good in this world. Will you marry me?" I said yes without hesitation, tears streaming down my face as he slipped the ring onto my finger. Around us, other customers applauded, but Luca's eyes never left mine. In that moment, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. But then, he mentioned the engagement party, and I saw something flicker across his face. It was gone so quickly I almost missed it. A shadow of concern, or maybe resignation. "My family wants to meet you properly," he said, still holding my hand. "My mother is already planning everything. She insists on throwing a party at the house." "That's wonderful," I said, though my stomach tightened slightly. "I'd love to meet them." Luca studied my face for a long moment. "My family is traditional, Jasmine. Old world. They have certain expectations, certain ways of seeing things. I need you to know that whatever happens, whatever they say, it doesn't change how I feel about you." "Why would anything they say matter?" I asked, confused by his warning. "Because people show who they are when they think they have power," he said quietly, "and my family has always had power." I should have listened more carefully to that warning. I should have understood what he was really trying to tell me. But I was so happy, so in love, that I couldn't imagine anything dampening our joy. The week before the party, I obsessed over every detail. What should I wear? How should I act? I wanted to make a good impression on the people who mattered to Luca. I finally chose a simple red dress, elegant but not too flashy. When I tried it on for him, Luca smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. "You look beautiful," he said. "You always do. Just remember what I said. Be yourself and don't let them make you feel small." The drive to his family's home took us out of the city, through increasingly upscale neighborhoods until we turned onto a private road. The house, when it finally came into view, made my breath catch. It wasn't the modern glass and steel mansion I'd half expected. Instead, it was an imposing stone structure that looked like it had stood for generations. Dark brick, heavy wooden doors, narrow windows that seemed to watch our approach. The gardens were immaculately maintained but had a formal severity to them, with sculpted hedges and stone fountains that spoke of old money and older traditions. Wow, I whispered, suddenly feeling very small in my department store dress. Luca parked the Maserati in a circular driveway already filled with expensive cars, BMWs, Mercedes, even a Rolls-Royce. But they were all dark colors, black or deep blue or charcoal gray. Nothing flashy or attention-seeking. It's just a house, Luca said, but his jaw was tight. Just walls and rooms. And your family, I added. And my family, he agreed, his voice carrying a weight I didn't fully understand. He came around to open my door, a gesture he always made, and took my hand. His grip was firm, almost protective, as we walked toward those massive front doors. They opened before we reached them, as if we'd been watched from inside. The interior was even more imposing than the exterior. Dark wood paneling covered the walls, and the lighting came from amber-shaded lamps and what looked like actual candles in wall sconces. The air smelled of leather, old books, and cigar smoke. Oil paintings in heavy frames lined the hallways, portraits of stern-looking men and elegant women who all shared Luca's dark eyes and strong features. This wasn't just a house. It was a legacy, a fortress, a place where power had been accumulated and protected for generations. The foyer was filled with people, and they all turned to watch as we entered. The women wore jewelry that caught the amber light, diamonds and gold that looked like family heirlooms rather than recent purchases. The men stood with a particular kind of confidence, the kind that comes from never having to prove anything to anyone. They held glasses of dark liquor and spoke in low tones that stopped when we appeared. A woman detached herself from a group near the grand staircase and glided toward us. She had to be Luca's mother. She had his eyes, that same dark intensity, but where Luca's gaze could be warm when he looked at me, hers was calculating and cold. Her silver hair was styled perfectly, and she wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my car. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, but they seemed less like adornment and more like armor. "Luca," she said, kissing both his cheeks in the European manner. Then she turned to me, and I felt her assessment like a physical touch, noting every detail of my appearance and finding it wanting. "And this must be Jasmine." "Mother, this is my fiancée, Jasmine." "Jasmine, my mother, Patricia Moretti." "Mrs. Moretti," I said, offering my hand. She took it briefly, her grip light and dismissive. "Patricia, please, we're going to be family after all." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Luca has told us so much about you. A teacher, isn't that right?" "Yes, third grade. I love working with children." "How noble," Patricia said, in a tone that made nobility sound like a character flaw. "It must be very rewarding, if not particularly profitable." Before I could respond, a younger woman appeared at Patricia's elbow. She had to be Luca's sister. She had the same dark hair and strong features, but where Luca's face could be gentle, hers was sharp with judgment. "So you're the elementary school teacher," she said, making it sound like an insult. "I'm Amanda, Luca's sister." I have to say, when Luca said he was bringing someone, I expected someone more suited to our family. "Amanda," Luca's voice carried a warning, but she ignored it. "What? I'm just being honest. We have certain standards, certain expectations. Teaching children their ABCs is very sweet, but it's hardly preparation for this world." I felt my face flush, but I kept my voice steady. "I teach much more than ABCs. I help children develop critical thinking skills, creativity, and confidence." "Of course you do," Amanda replied with a patronizing smile. "How fulfilling that must be for you. Such simple pleasures." Luca stepped closer to me, his presence solid and protective. "Jasmine is excellent at what she does. Her students love her, and she makes a real difference in their lives." "I'm sure she does," Patricia interjected smoothly. "Teaching is such important work. Essential, really, even if it isn't particularly lucrative or prestigious." The words hung in the air, their meaning crystal clear. I wasn't wealthy enough, wasn't important enough, wasn't good enough for their son. And this was just the beginning of the evening. As more relatives and family friends were introduced, the pattern repeated itself. Each conversation felt like an interrogation, each question designed to highlight how different my world was from theirs. Where did I go to school? A state university? Where did my parents work? My father was a mechanic, my mother a grocery clerk. Where did I live? A modest apartment across town. Each answer seemed to confirm their worst suspicions about me. An older man who Luca introduced as his Uncle Gerald was particularly direct after he'd had several glasses of what looked like expensive scotch. "So your people aren't in business then?" he asked, his words slightly slurred. "My father owns his own auto repair shop," I said, trying to find some common ground. "He's been self-employed for 20 years. Gerald laughed, a harsh sound. "A repair shop. Well, I suppose that's entrepreneurial in its own way. Different from what we do, of course. Our family has been in business for 4 generations. Real business, you understand. The kind that builds empires. Every honest job has value," I replied quietly. "Honest," Gerald repeated, as if the word was amusing. "Yes, I suppose that's important to people in your position. When you don't have much, you have to hold on to your principles, don't you?" Luca appeared at my side then, his hand finding the small of my back. "Uncle Gerald has had enough to drink," he said, his voice pleasant, but with an undertone that made Gerald's smile falter. "Perhaps you should get some air." Gerald muttered something and wandered away, but the damage was done. I could feel eyes on me from every corner of the room, assessing, judging, finding me lacking. I excused myself and made my way to what looked like a powder room, needing a moment alone to compose myself. The bathroom was as elegant as the rest of the house, with marble counters and gold fixtures. I stared at my reflection in the ornate mirror, trying to see what Luca saw in me, trying to understand why these people couldn't see it too. The door opened behind me and Patricia entered. We were alone for the first time since I'd arrived. "Jasmine," she said, her voice softer now, but somehow more dangerous. "I hope you're not letting the family overwhelm you. We can be intense when we're all together." "Everyone has been very welcoming," I lied. Patricia smiled slightly, acknowledging that we both knew the truth. "My son cares for you. That much is obvious. Luca doesn't give his heart easily, which makes this situation rather delicate." "What situation?" I asked, though I knew what was coming. "You have to understand our world, dear. The Moretti family has existed for generations because we're careful about who we bring into the fold. We have certain standards, certain expectations. Marriage isn't just about love in families like ours. It's about legacy, about maintaining what has been built." "I love Luca," I said firmly, "and he loves me. That should be enough." "Should it?" Patricia's expression was almost pitying. "Love is wonderful, of course, but it fades. And when it does, what are you left with? Can you handle the obligations that come with being a Moretti? The expectations, the scrutiny? Can you move in our circles, speak our language, understand our ways?" "I can learn," I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. "Can you?" Patricia touched up her lipstick with practiced precision. "Or will you always be the teacher from the modest apartment, trying to fit into a world that never really accepts you?" "I'm not being cruel, Jasmine. I'm being realistic. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is acknowledge when two people are too different to truly work." She left me standing there, her words echoing in my ears. I stared at myself in the mirror again, and for the first time, I wondered if she was right. Maybe I was fooling myself, thinking love could bridge such a vast gap. When I returned to the party, I found Luca deep in conversation with several older men in a corner of what appeared to be a study. They stood around a heavy oak desk, speaking in low voices, and the atmosphere around them was different from the rest of the party, more serious, more dangerous. When one of them noticed me watching, he said something to Luca, who turned to look at me. His expression was unreadable, and for a moment, he looked like a stranger. I turned away, feeling more alone than ever, and found myself near a group of younger women who appeared to be around my age. They were discussing someone's recent vacation to the Amalfi Coast, and I was about to try joining the conversation when I heard my name. "Jasmine seems sweet enough," one of them was saying, thinking I was out of earshot. "But really, what does Luca see in her?" "It's obvious, isn't it?" another replied. "She's pretty, she's young, and she's after his money. I mean, look at her dress. It's from a department store. She's so clearly out of her depth." "Poor Luca," a third voice sighed. "He's always been too trusting. Remember that girl from college? At least she came from a decent family." I stood frozen, the glass in my hand trembling. These women didn't even know me, but they'd already decided who I was and what I wanted. The accusation of being a gold digger stung more than anything else because it was so unfair. I'd never asked Luca for anything. I'd never cared about his money. I'd fallen in love with the man who listened when I talked about my students, who made me feel valued and safe. But how could I prove that to people who had already made up their minds? The evening continued to deteriorate. I overheard more whispered conversations, caught more judgmental looks. Amanda was particularly vicious, making loud comments to anyone who would listen about how inappropriate I was for Luca, how teaching elementary school was barely a real job, how my background was so far beneath theirs that the engagement was practically a joke. "Can you imagine her at family dinners?" Amanda said with a laugh that carried across the room. "What would she even talk about? Finger painting and multiplication tables?" She'd be completely lost. Lucas seemed oblivious to it all. He moved through the room with easy confidence, stopping to speak with various relatives and family associates. He belonged here in a way I never could. This was his world. These were his people, and I was the outsider who didn't fit. Finally, I couldn't take any more. I slipped out onto a terrace that overlooked the dark gardens, breathing in the cool night air and trying not to cry. My phone buzzed in my small purse, and I pulled it out to see a text from my brother Daniel. "How's the party going? Are they treating my little sister well?" I stared at the message, tears finally spilling over. Daniel had always been my protector, even when we were children. He was 8 years older than me and had worked multiple jobs to help pay for my college education when our parents couldn't afford it. He'd been so proud when I got my teaching position, so thrilled when I told him about Luca. But Daniel didn't know about tonight. He didn't know that Luca's family saw me as nothing more than an opportunistic interloper who was trying to steal their precious son. He didn't know that I was standing alone on this terrace, wondering if love really was enough to overcome such vast differences in background and expectation. I was about to text him back when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, hoping it was Luca, but it was Patricia again. "Getting some air?" she asked, joining me at the stone railing. The gardens below were illuminated by subtle landscape lighting, creating pools of shadow and amber glow. "It's a beautiful evening," I managed to say. "Jasmine, I want to be completely honest with you." Patricia's voice had lost its earlier edge. She sounded almost kind now, which somehow made what she said worse. "You seem like a genuinely nice person. Under different circumstances, I might have liked you, but circumstances matter in our world." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you need to consider whether this is really what you want. Our family isn't like others. There are expectations, obligations, things that aren't immediately apparent. Luca will have responsibilities that require a particular kind of support. Can you provide that? Can you navigate our world, understand our ways, handle the pressure?" "I love him," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I don't doubt that you think you do, but love isn't always enough. Sometimes the kindest thing, the most loving thing, is to let someone go before you both get hurt. You're young, you have your whole life ahead of you. Do you really want to spend it trying to fit into a world that will never fully accept you?" She left me there with those words hanging in the air, and I realized she was right about one thing. I would never be accepted by these people. No matter what I did, how hard I tried, how much I learned about their ways, I would always be the elementary school teacher who wasn't good enough for their son. When I returned inside, determined to find Luca and leave, I walked past the living room where Amanda was holding court with a group of cousins and family friends. She wasn't even trying to lower her voice anymore. "I mean, she's a public school teacher," Amanda was saying with obvious disdain. "Can you imagine? She probably makes less in a year than I spend on shoes. And that dress. Did she borrow it from one of her students' mothers?" The group erupted in laughter, and I felt something crack inside me. I'd endured their condescension all evening, but this was too much. I stepped into the room and the laughter died abruptly. Amanda turned to face me, surprise quickly morphing into something like embarrassment at being caught, though not enough to show real remorse. "Jasmine," she said, recovering quickly, "we were just talking about education and how important teachers are to society." "No, you weren't," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You were mocking my career and my life. You've all spent this entire evening judging me, deciding I'm not good enough for Luca, assuming I'm only here for his money. Patricia appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Jasmine, dear, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I said quietly. You've all made yourselves perfectly clear. I'm not wealthy enough, not sophisticated enough, not good enough for your family. And you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't belong in your world. Amanda's voice cut through the uncomfortable silence that followed. Well, at least she's finally being honest about it. I mean, let's be realistic. What could a public school teacher possibly offer someone like Luca? That was the moment I felt my phone buzz again. I looked down to see another message from Daniel. Hope you're having fun. If anyone gives you trouble, let me know. I'll be in the city tomorrow anyway. Looking at that message, something inside me shifted. I was tired of defending myself to people who had already decided I wasn't worth knowing. I was tired of trying to prove my value to those who only measured worth in bank accounts and family names. I typed quickly. Actually, could you come now? I could use some support. His response was immediate. On my way, give me the address. I sent him the location and then looked up at the room full of people who had spent the evening tearing me down. I think I'll wait for my ride outside, I said quietly. Jasmine, please, Patricia said, her voice taking on a note of concern. Let's not be hasty. We can discuss this rationally. But I was done discussing. I was done trying to prove myself. I walked toward the entrance, aware of the whispers starting behind me, the speculation about what had just happened. Luca finally appeared, pushing through the crowd. Jasmine, what's going on? What happened? Ask your family, I said, not stopping. Ask them what they've been saying about me all night while you were busy with your business associates. Wait, please, he said, catching my arm gently. Don't leave like this. I looked at him, this man I'd thought I loved, and saw the confusion in his eyes. He genuinely didn't understand what had been happening under his own roof. He hadn't noticed his family systematically destroying me while he'd been occupied elsewhere. I need some air, I said. My brother is coming to get me. Daniel, Luca looked surprised. I didn't know he was in town. Neither did I said, but he's coming now. I walked outside and stood in the circular driveway, the cool night air helping to clear my head. Behind me, I could hear raised voices in the house. Luca was apparently finally confronting his family about their treatment of me, but it was too little, too late. 20 minutes passed. I stood there in the darkness, my arms wrapped around myself, watching the lights of the city in the distance. Then I saw headlights turning onto the private road that led to the estate. But it wasn't just one car. It was a convoy of black SUVs, their headlights cutting through the darkness like spotlights. I watched in confusion as they approached, wondering if the Morettis were expecting other guests. The vehicles pulled up to the house with precision, stopping in a coordinated formation that spoke of professional planning. Men in dark suits emerged from the first SUV, moving with the controlled efficiency of trained security personnel. They weren't just bodyguards or drivers. These were professionals, the kind of people who knew how to assess threats and respond to danger. The passenger door of the second SUV opened, and my brother Daniel stepped out. But this wasn't the Daniel I was used to seeing in casual clothes when he visited my apartment. This was Daniel in his full professional capacity. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Luca's. His presence commanded immediate attention, and the security personnel around him moved with the kind of practiced coordination that came from working together extensively. You see, there was something I hadn't told Ryan's family about my background, something I'd kept private because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for who my brother was. Daniel wasn't just my protective older brother. He was Daniel Chen, CEO and founder of Chen Industries, one of the most successful technology companies in the country. He'd built his empire from nothing, starting with a software company in his college dorm room and growing it into a multinational corporation worth billions. His company had revolutionized data security, and his name carried weight in boardrooms around the world. But to me, he was still just Daniel, the brother who'd helped me with my homework, who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd been there for every important moment of my life. He'd always insisted that I live my own life, make my own way, never use his name or wealth as a shortcut. He wanted me to be valued for myself, not for my connection to him. As Daniel approached, I saw movement inside the house. People were gathering at the windows, trying to see what was happening. Through the glass, I could see confusion turning to recognition, turning to panic as someone identified who had just arrived. Daniel spotted me immediately, and his serious business expression softened into a genuine smile. He walked over and pulled me into a hug, not caring that we were being watched by a house full of people who'd spent the evening judging me. "Hey, little sister," he said softly. "Rough night?" "Something like that," I managed. "Well, let's go inside and meet these people who've been making you feel unwelcome, shall we?" As we walked toward the entrance, I could hear the buzz of conversation inside growing louder. Someone had obviously recognized Daniel, and word was spreading through the party like wildfire. The massive front doors opened before we reached them, and Patricia stood there, her face pale with shock. Behind her, the foyer was filled with people, all of them staring with expressions ranging from confusion to horror. "Mr. Chen," Patricia stammered, her usual composure completely shattered. "We weren't expecting, I mean, we didn't realize, we had no idea that Jasmine was your—" "My sister," Daniel said calmly, his arms still around my shoulders. "Yes, I imagine that might have changed how you treated her this evening." The silence that followed was absolute. I could see Amanda in the background, her face white with shock. Other guests were whispering frantically to each other, the implications of the situation becoming clear. Luca pushed through the crowd, his expression showing complete shock. "Daniel Chen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're Jasmine's brother." "I am," Daniel replied, his tone pleasant but with an underlying edge. "And I understand there's been some confusion tonight about my sister's worth and intentions." Patricia was desperately trying to recover. "Mr. Chen, if we had known who Jasmine was, I mean, her connection to you, we certainly would have, that is, we never intended any disrespect." "Didn't you?" Daniel's question was quiet, but it carried clearly through the hushed room. "Because from what I understand, you've spent the evening questioning my sister's motives, mocking her career and suggesting she's not good enough for your family. You did all that without knowing who she was connected to. The question is, would you have done it if you'd known?" The crowd in the foyer parted as more people pushed forward to witness this confrontation. I could see the panic in their eyes as they realized they'd been insulting the sister of one of the most powerful men in the country, a man whose company did business with corporations around the world, a man who had influence in circles these people desperately wanted to access. Amanda finally found her voice, though it shook. "Mr. Chen, we didn't know. If we had realized who Jasmine was, we never would have—" "Who she was?" Daniel's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "She's exactly who she's always been. A dedicated teacher, a caring person, a woman who works hard and loves deeply. The only thing that's changed is that now you know her last name carries weight in certain circles." He looked around the room, his gaze moving from face to face, and people actually stepped back from his attention. "My sister chose not to use our family name or wealth because she wanted to be valued for who she is, not what she has access to. She wanted to build her own life, make her own way. I respected that choice, even though it meant watching people judge her unfairly, watching people like you make assumptions based on nothing but your own prejudices." Patricia tried again. "Mr. Chen, please understand, we had no way of knowing. If Jasmine had mentioned her family background, why should she have to?" Daniel's question cut through her excuses. "Why should anyone have to prove their worth through their family's achievements? My sister is valuable because of who she is, not because of who I am." He turned to address the entire room. "I've spent my career building something from nothing. I started with an idea in a college dorm room and turned it into a company that employs thousands of people. And through all of that, I've learned one essential truth. Character isn't measured by bank accounts or family names. It's measured by how you treat people, especially people you perceive as having less power than you." The silence in the room was oppressive. These people who I had spent the evening so confident in their own superiority were now faced with the reality that they had revealed their true characters to someone who could significantly impact their business and social lives. "What disappoints me most," Daniel continued, his voice quieter now, but somehow more impactful, "is that you couldn't see what I see when I look at my sister. I see someone who has dedicated her life to helping children, who works long hours for modest pay because she believes education matters. I see someone with integrity, compassion, and strength. Someone who chose to be a teacher, not because she had no other options, but because she genuinely wanted to make a difference in children's lives. He looked directly at Patricia. Instead, you saw someone to be dismissed. Someone whose worth could only be measured by her bank account and her family's social standing. You couldn't see past your own limited worldview to recognize the remarkable woman standing in front of you. And that says far more about you than it does about her. Amanda, who had been so cruel earlier, was visibly shaking now. Mr. Chen, I'm so sorry. I never meant to. I didn't realize. You meant exactly what you said, Daniel replied, his tone matter-of-fact rather than angry, which somehow made it worse. You meant to make my sister feel small and unwelcome. You meant to suggest she was here for money rather than love. You meant to mock her career and her life choices. The only thing you didn't mean was to be held accountable for it. Luca finally spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. Jasmine, I'm so sorry. I had no idea they were treating you this way. I should have noticed, should have protected you. I looked at Luca, at this man I'd thought I loved, and felt a clarity I hadn't experienced all evening. The problem isn't that you didn't know about my brother Luca. The problem is that you didn't defend me when your family was tearing me apart. You didn't notice that the woman you claimed to love was being humiliated in your own home. The truth of my words hit him visibly, and he took a step back as if I'd physically struck him. I'm proud of you, Jasmine, Daniel said, squeezing my shoulder gently. You've handled this with more grace than they deserved. He looked back at the assembled crowd. I want to be clear about something. My sister doesn't need my money or my influence to be worthy of respect. She's worthy of respect because she's a good person who makes the world better through her work and her character. The fact that she's connected to wealth and power is irrelevant to her value as a human being. Patricia made one last desperate attempt at damage control. Mr. Chen, please understand, we have the utmost respect for your sister. Perhaps we can start over, have dinner, get to know each other properly under better circumstances. I don't think so, Daniel said firmly. You've already shown who you are. You only value my sister now because you know she might be useful to you. That's not respect. That's opportunism, and it's exactly what you accused her of. He turned to me. Ready to go home? I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. As we walked toward the door, I could hear the frantic whispers starting behind us. These people were already calculating the damage, wondering how this evening would affect their social standing in business and relationships. But I didn't care anymore. I was done trying to prove myself to people who would never truly accept me for who I was. I was done pretending that their approval mattered more than my own self-worth. As we reached the SUV, I turned back to look at the house one last time. Through the windows, I could see the party guests still gathered in the foyer, their faces showing shock, embarrassment, and fear. Luca appeared in the doorway calling my name, but I didn't stop. Some relationships, once broken by fundamental disrespect, can't be repaired. Daniel held the car door open for me. You know, he said with a slight smile, I was looking forward to meeting your fiancé. Too bad he couldn't be bothered to defend you when it actually mattered. As we drove away, I felt something I hadn't felt all evening. Peace. The people at that party had shown me exactly who they were, and I was grateful for the lesson, however painful it had been. I deserve better than conditional acceptance. I deserve better than people who only valued me for my connections. And most importantly, I deserve better than a man who would stand by while his family attacked the woman he claimed to love. The next morning, I returned the engagement ring by messenger, along with a simple note written on plain stationery. I hope you find someone your family considers worthy. I hope I find someone who knows I already am. The weeks that followed were difficult. I had to process the end of a relationship I thought would last forever. Had to come to terms with how badly I'd been treated. Had to rebuild my sense of self-worth that had been so thoroughly attacked that night. But with each day that passed, I felt stronger, more certain that I'd made the right choice. Daniel checked on me frequently, but he never said I told you so. He never criticized my choice to keep our relationship private or suggested that things might have been different if I'd used his name from the start. He understood, better than most people could, why I'd wanted to be valued for myself rather than for my connections. You did the right thing, he told me one evening over dinner at my apartment. Anyone who can't see your worth without a net worth statement isn't worthy of you. 3 months later, I met someone new. His name was Marcus, and he was a fellow teacher at a neighboring school. We met at an educational conference, bonding over our shared passion for helping struggling readers. When I told him about my brother on our third date, his reaction was interested but not intimidated. "That's impressive," he said. "He must be very proud of you." "He is," I replied. "But what about you? Does it bother you that my brother is wealthy and influential?" Marcus thought about it seriously. "It's part of who you are, part of your family, but it's not who you are, if that makes sense. You're a teacher who cares about her students. That's what I see when I look at you. That's what I'm interested in." When I finally introduced Marcus to Daniel, watching them shake hands and start talking about education policy and childhood literacy, I knew I'd found something real. Daniel approved, not because Marcus was intimidated by his wealth or trying to use the connection, but because Marcus genuinely valued me for who I was. "He's good," Daniel said later, after Marcus had left. "He sees you. That's rare." And that's the difference between genuine respect and conditional acceptance. Real love doesn't need a background check or a net worth statement to prove its validity. Real love sees the person, values their character, respects their choices. Real love doesn't wait to find out who someone is connected to before deciding they're worthy of basic human dignity. Looking back on that night at the Moretti estate, I realize it was one of the most valuable experiences of my life, even though it was painful. Those people showed me exactly who they were when they thought I had no power. They revealed their prejudices, their shallow values, their conditional acceptance. And in doing so, they gave me the gift of clarity. I learned that I don't need to prove myself to people who have already decided I'm not enough. I learned that my worth isn't determined by other people's opinions or their acceptance. I learned that the right person will see my value without needing a list of credentials or connections. Sometimes the people who underestimate you end up learning the hardest lessons. The Morettis learned that night that appearances can be deceiving, that the quiet elementary school teacher they dismissed had connections that could have benefited them tremendously. But more importantly, they learned something about themselves, about their own prejudices and shallow values. I heard later through mutual acquaintances that the story of that evening spread through their social circles, that the Moretti family became something of a cautionary tale about the dangers of judging too quickly, of valuing appearance over character, of treating people as less than simply because they didn't have obvious wealth or status. I don't take pleasure in their embarrassment. I'm not happy that they suffered social consequences for their behavior, but I do take comfort in knowing that maybe, just maybe, they think twice now before dismissing someone based on superficial judgments. Maybe they learned something about respect and human dignity. As for Luca, I heard he eventually married someone from another old family, someone who fit easily into his world. I hope he's happy. I hope he found what he was looking for. But I also hope he learned something from our relationship, something about the importance of defending the people you love, of noticing when they're hurting, of standing up for them, even against your own family. My life now is exactly what I wanted it to be. I teach my students, I love my work, and I'm building a life with someone who values me for exactly who I am. Daniel is still my protector, still my champion, but now I don't need him to defend me. I've learned to defend myself, to know my own worth, to walk away from situations and people that don't serve my highest good. If this story resonated with you, I hope it reminds you of your own worth. Your value isn't determined by your bank account, your family name, or other people's opinions of you. Your value is inherent, unchangeable, based on your character and your actions and the love you bring to the world. Never let anyone make you feel less than you are. And if they do, remember that their judgment says everything about them and nothing about you. Walk away with your head high, knowing that the right people will see your worth without needing proof. The right people will value you for who you are, not for what you have or who you're connected to. That's the lesson I learned that night, standing in that imposing house surrounded by people who thought they were better than me. I learned that I don't need their approval. I never did, and neither do you.